and switch over and share there we go. All right, mitigating risk. So managing risk is to create a level of protection that mitigates the vulnerabilities to the threats and reduces potential consequences. Now, something that we as cybersecurity professionals have to underline is so many people who are not in IT think that you can completely take risk out, and you cannot. It is not possible. You cannot make 100% zero risk environment unless you're going to shut everything off and make sure no one ever uses it, in which case, what's the point? But you can manage your risk, and your organization that you're doing it for can create what they consider acceptable risks. And each organization has acceptable risk variances. So it involves the following: defining what your risk is, understanding the types of risks, knowing different methods of risk analysis, and realizing how to manage risk. Now, this is its own whole field now. It used to be just kind of crammed in there with some of the other stuff, but if you get really good at this, this is a growing field that you can really get into. Okay. An asset is any item that has a positive economic value. The asset value is the relative worth of an asset. And that's kind of like when you think about relative worth, if any of you have ever had to do anything with cars, it's kind of like blue book value versus how much you can actually get for the car. And asset value and relative worth are not exactly the same as what you're going to pay for a brand new item. So keep that in mind. Assets are continually under threat, which is a type of action that has the potential to cause harm. Risk is defined as a situation that involves exposure to some type of danger. Risk can also be described as a function of threats, consequences of those threats, and the resulting vulnerabilities. All right, so this is just a small, there are tons of different ones in subcategories, but this is a table that goes about different threat categories, what descriptions and examples. So we have strategic, and that is action that affects the long-term goals of the organization. So that's like a theft of intellectual property, not pursuing a new opportunity, loss of a major account, or a competitor entering the market. Compliance, following or not following, regulation or standard, breach of contract, not responding to the introduction of new laws. Financial, impact of financial decision or marketing factors, increase in interest rates, global financial crisis are examples. Operational, events that impact the daily business of the organization, fire, hazardous chemical spills, power blackouts, things like that. Technical, events that affect information technology systems, denial of service attacks, SQL injections, attacks, viruses, all sorts of stuff that we've been learning about. Managerial, actions related to the management of the organization, long-term illness of the company president, key employees resigning. COVID hit this one particularly hard because, you had to shift to different modalities. You had to have more people that were working from home and things like that. Risk types. Risk types can be grouped into the following categories: internal and external, legacy systems, read old systems, multi-party, intellectual property, which is its own beast and has a lot of legal terms in there, and software compliance and licensing. Risk analysis. Risk analysis is a process to identify and assess the factors that may jeopardize the success of a project or reaching a stated goal. Following a methodology for performing a risk analysis is crucial. Methodology. Identifying risks can be difficult due to the following. Risks can be elusive, unconscious human biases. So you know how we've talked about human bias and all sorts of things? Well, identifying risks can also be influenced by natural human bias. A methodology helps to minimize human factors in identifying risks by not relying on a few employees in an organization, but involves many individuals in the process. Risk control self-assessment, or RCSA, is an empowering methodology by which management and staff collectively work to identify and evaluate risks. The nice thing about this is if you have just one, like upper tier management working on risks, that's great. But if you don't have everyone working on it, they're like, well, hey, what about XYZ? And you're like, oh, yeah, I never thought of that. So you need representatives from all areas in order to have good risk identification. There are two approaches to risk assessments. There's qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative uses the educated guess based on observation, typically assigns a numeric value 1 through 10 or label high, medium, or low. Usually I see the high, medium, low, and usually you see the red, yellow, green traffic light thing go with those two, and those represent the risks. And then there's quantitative risk assessment, which attempts to create a, quote, hard number associated with the risk of an element in a system by using historical data. This can be divided into the likelihood of a risk and the impact of a risk being successful. Yeah, I can understand that. So everything in the military being a combo of both. I can't imagine the military would want just one or the other. And a lot of government agencies will require reports with both qualitative and quantitative. For example, when I worked for the state police, we had qualitative and quantitative types of testing. Whenever you do scientific stuff, you have two different approaches. So I'm not surprised that they like both. So again, risk likelihood. Several quantitative tools can be used to predict the likelihood of a risk. Mean time between failure, or MTBF, mean time to recovery, mean time to failure, and failure in time. Historical data can be used to determine the likelihood of a risk occurring within a year, known as annualized rate of occurrence, or ARO. And they do use ARO figures a lot in these. And it can be really helpful, especially if you're going to create a table that's like, okay, here's our annualized rate of occurrence. And we need, based on this, we need to have this many years to rotate in and out new devices. That's how I've seen like server and hardware stuff done. They use that annualized rate of occurrence. They're like, well, if you go over this, you run the risk of having a bunch of stuff die, and then you don't have this built into your budget, and you're just like, sucks to be you. So having this already planned in really helps. Okay, so source and explanation. Law enforcement agencies, crime statistics on the area of facilities to determine the probability of vandalism, break-ins, or dangers potentially encountered by personnel. Insurance companies, risks faced by other companies, and the amount paid out when these risks became a reality. Computer incident monitoring organizations, data regarding a variety of technology-related risks, failures, and attacks. Now, the law enforcement agency crime stats, those are public. You can get those, and it's amazing what you can look up. When I was doing my social statistics class, which is exactly as dry as it sounds, but once you find out all the really cool stuff that you can look up, looking up those things, and then you know how I am always harping on physical security as part of cybersecurity. If you're helping, say, to either secure a building or help pick a site to create a secure building, those are really, really great. Yeah, no, I love social studies too. I almost got my social studies degree, but then I realized I would have had to have a PhD to do anything. And most of the really good programs for getting a PhD are not anywhere near us. So I kind of use social engineering and stuff to do my social science side. So I kind of mixed it in with my IT side. So I kind of got the best of both worlds on that one. Okay, risk impact. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say the insurance companies, their entire business model is risk assessment versus risk reward, based on everything. Like that's how they literally do
Yep.
the calculations for everything.
Yeah, and they actually have it. It makes your brain hurt, but they actually have entire formulas on how they create those risk assessments. And you can go out and look them up. It gets a little bit crazy on some of the different risk assessment formulas, but that's why I said if you're good at this, you can make a lot of money. But working with an insurance company and people like that, sometimes it's nice to have a third party to be like, I want to know this information. You guys do the math is kind of a nice thing to be able to do. Risk impact. Determining the impact of risk involves comparing the monetary loss associated with an asset in order to determine the amount of money that would be lost if the risk occurred. So 2 risk calculation formulas are used to calculate your expected loss. There's your ALA and SLE, your single loss expectancy. That's your expected monetary loss every time a risk occurs, and your annualized loss expectancy. And that is the expected monetary loss that can be from assets due to risk over a 1-year period. They really like to do those in 1 year, biannual, the quarterly, because they really like those quarterly, biannually, yearly numbers for like who, if they're a publicly traded company, they like it for their shareholders. They just, if they're like an education company, they have to, a lot of times they have to have those publicly available because people want to go, okay, well, where's our money going? So that's why they really like those yearly annual things. Representing risks, there's the risk register. Risk register is a list of potential threats and associated risks. A risk matrix or heat map, and I actually like those, they're really cool, is a visual color-coded tool that lists the impact and likelihood of risks. In fact, let me stop sharing for just a second. I'll show you a really cool one that is done by an organization who looks up and keeps K through 12 information. And I dealt with these guys. Quite a bit. Let's see, there we go. They have a nice information security map. There we go. No, I don't want to subscribe. Let me get that loaded full screen and then I'll share it with you guys. Okay, so this is the K through 12 cybersecurity incident map. And as you can see, I'm quite proud that Pocatello was not nailed on any of the times that I was there, but Idaho Falls, Twin Falls, and some of the other ones were hit. But if you look across the nation, you can see all those nice little colored dots and things. So this is just a simple example. There are much more complicated examples of that out there. But they can be really, really nice. Let me make sure I'm actually sharing the right screen with you guys. There we go. They can be really great examples, especially if you're using for non-technical people. They really like to have those visual aspects. So it shows your impact and likelihood of your risks. That one shows not the likelihood, but that one shows the impact of things that have previously happened. And the different colors that are on that one are the types of attacks that happened. So this one's what a risk register looked like. And when I did remember me talking about my capstone, I had to create one like this. And they really like that traffic light thing, and then orange, of course, thrown in there for the not quite terrible, but not great aspect. And then this is what a risk matrix looks like. And you can see how they've got that broken out. You have your low and then high, and then you have your limited and catastrophic on your relative impact. And I don't know what it is about bright, shiny colors, but the minute you put these in there when you're trying to explain stuff to people, it really does make a huge impact. I tried to do it with other things, but the minute I started using stuff like this to explain to people, it made a huge difference. Risk appetite involves reducing risk to a level that is considered acceptable for the organization. Managing risk involves using specific strategies and control types, addressing third-party risk, and incorporating user training. Determining a strategy, there's 4 strategies for dealing with risk. And this is where I was like, you can't have 0. So there's acceptance, transference, avoidance, and mitigation. Using controls, a security control is a safeguard or countermeasure employed within an organizational information system to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the technology system and its data. A security control attempts to limit exposure to danger. There are 3 categories of control. Specific types of controls are found within the 3 broad categories of controls. Looks like they're on the next ones. So, control categories: managerial, thus controls that use administrative methods. Acceptable use policy that specifies users should not visit malicious websites. Operational, controls implemented and executed by people. Conducting workshops to train users to identify and delete phishing messages. And then there's technical, controls incorporated as part of hardware, software, or firmware. Unified threat management device that performs packet filtering, anti-phishing, and web filtering. All right, and on the next one, we have our control type description, when it occurs, an example. So there's a deterrent control. This discourages the attack. It occurs before the attack. An example is posting signs to indicate that the area is under video surveillance. There's preventative control. This is to prevent the attack. It happens before an attack, and providing security awareness training for all users. Physical control, prevent an attack, happens before an attack, building fences that surround the perimeter. Detective control, this is to identify attack during an attack, installing motion detection sensors. Compensating control, alternative to normal control, this happens during an attack. Isolating an infected computer on a different network. So remember us talking about the quarantine networks? That would be an example. Corrective control, lessen damage from an attack. This is after an attack. Cleaning a virus cleaned from an infected server. Implement third-party risk management. There are several risks associated with using third parties. It can be difficult to coordinate their diverse activities with the organization. Almost all third parties today require access to the organization's computer network to provide them the ability to perform their IT-related functions. Risks of third-party integration, onboarding and offboarding, application and social media network sharing, privacy and risk awareness, and data considerations. One of the means by which all parties can reduce risk is to reach an understanding through interoperability agreements. Interoperability agreements are formal contractual relationships as they relate to security policy and procedures. It's a really good idea to get these outlined beforehand so that you can have that there and say, look, you already signed this. And that way they can't say, well, you didn't tell us we couldn't. Agreements that should be regularly reviewed to verify compliance and performance standards include service level agreements or SLAs. And this is a service contract that specifies what services will be provided and the responsibilities of each party. Business partnership agreements or BPA is a contract used to establish the rules and responsibilities of each partner. Memorandum of understanding. This describes an agreement between two or more parties. Agreements that, this just continued. An NDA or non-disclosure agreement is a legal contract between parties that specify how confidential material will be shared between the parties, but restricted to others. Measurement system analysis, MSA, uses scientific tools to determine the amount of variation that is added to a process by a measurement system. End of life, EOL, is a term used by a manufacturer to indicate that a product has reached the end of its useful life. EOS, end of service, indicates the end of support. Those two are incredibly important. I don't know how many times I've gotten into arguments with people about end of life and been, had to put out things repetitively and been like, it's dying, it's going away, it's dead, and they still kick and fight because people don't like change, especially if they've gotten used to something. And if you let them get away with using things that are past EOL, it means you can't patch them and it can cause all sorts of security issues. So by using end of life, it gives you a platform to say, yeah, sorry, we already told you about this. You need to move on and this is what we have to do. And there will be kicking and screaming because there's always kicking and screaming, but you have to. I remember the biggest one, I think, was the changes with Java and some of the things like that. Oh, that was painful. Provide users training. Training results in risk awareness, which is the raising of understanding of what risks exist, their potential impacts, and how they are managed. Training can make users aware of common risks and how they can become a human firewall to help mitigate risks. To view different traits of learners, looks like we have another table here on the next one. Training styles also impact how people learn. And then it looks like we have another table for different types of learning. Now, because I've been teaching, I've taught classes before, I've taught training and things like that for years and years before I taught as a professor. And there are always different types and ways that you can help people to learn. So if you're designing courses or helping, there are always new ways to do that. Okay. So looks like they're doing these based off of, and these are generalizations, so not everybody will always have this. So in the years born prior to 1946, patriotic, loyal, have faith in institutions, approximately 75 million in the US. 1946 to 64, idealistic, competitive, question authority, 80 million. 65 to 81, self-reliant, distrustful of institutions, adaptive to technology, 46 million. 82 to 2000, pragmatic, globally concerned, computer literate, media savvy, 76 million. So subject, pedagogical approach, and andragogical approach. There's desire, motivated by external pressures to get good grades or to pass on to next grade. Motivated by higher self-esteem or more recognition, desire for better quality of life. Student, dependent on a teacher for all learning, self-directed and responsible for own learning. Subject matter, defined by what the teacher wants to give. Learning is organized around situations in life or at work. Willingness to learn. Students are informed about what they must learn. A change triggers a readiness to learn, or students perceive a gap between where they are and where they want to be. Different techniques employed for user training. There's CBT or computer-based training, role-based awareness training, gamification, which works really well, especially the younger the person is. capture the flag, and phishing simulations. That one is very, very important because I don't care who you are, you will eventually get tripped up. Even as a cybersecurity professional, there are some amazingly good phishing simulations out there. So it's always a good idea to have those. So this is it's called Go Fish, and it's actually a really cool little product. It's a phishing simulation dashboard, and basically it'll give you a whole bunch of different little like templates, and you set them up, and then you send them out, and then you see your email sent, how many emails were opened, how many clicked the link, how many submitted data. And then it'll also frequently, it'll give you a what action do you take, and a lot of them choose, you failed this, here's how you go through your training. And or they'll just do a blind collection of data. At least those are the two most common ones I've seen. Knowledge check. Which option for dealing with risk involves the purchase of insurance? Now, they really didn't go over this. Remember us talking about acceptance, transference, avoidance, and mitigation. Go ahead and pick which one you think it is. If you've done the reading, you probably know which one it is. Okay, it's called transference. So by having a insurance company or somebody else cover the cost, you're transferring that risk over to them. Let me go back here. So by accepting the risk, you say, Matt, you know what? Stuff's going to happen. I'm just going to say it's okay for that to be at risk. Transference is where you get your insurance companies. Avoidance is when you, I'm going to have to go look up on if there's products for that. The blame game. And then there's mitigation where you have steps that you put in place to avoid the risk or to not get the risk. Yay, data privacy. Okay. Privacy is defined as the state or condition of being free from public attention's observation or interference to the degree that the person chooses. Data is collected on almost all actions today through web surfing, purchases, user surveys, and questionnaires. As technology devices gather data on user behavior, users are becoming increasingly concerned about how their private data is being collected, used, and stored. Another thing that happens is a lot of us are getting burnt out, and there are a lot of users that just are like, oh, whatever, just take whatever. And which is another concern, because those of us that are cybersecurity professionals are like, hey, do you know what you're giving away? So understanding data privacy includes the following: knowing the reasons for users' concern, understanding the consequences of a data breach, and identifying data types. Yeah, in fact, someone brought up cookies. There is a bit of a legal battle that is still going on websites that are like, in order to use our website, you have to accept our cookies. Well, that may or may not be legal, and there are still a lot of legal battles going on whether or not that is legal. User concerns revolve around the risks associated with the use of private data and fall into three broad categories: individual inconveniences and identity theft, association with groups, and statistical inferences. Okay. Issue and explanation. Data is gathered and kept in secret. Users have no formal rights to find out what private information is being gathered, who gathers it, or how it's being used. The accuracy of the data cannot be verified because users do not have the right to correct or control what personal information is gathered. Its accuracy may be suspect. In some cases, inaccurate or incomplete data may lead to erroneous decisions made about individuals without any verification. Identity theft can impact accuracy of data. Victims of identity theft often have information added to their profile that was the result of actions by the identity thieves, and even the victims have no right to see or correct the information. Unknown factors can impact overall ratings. Ratings are often created from combining thousands of individual factors or data streams, including race, religion, age, gender, household income, zip codes, presence of medical conditions, transactional purchase information from retailers, and hundreds more data points about individual consumers. How these different factors impact a person's overall rating is unknown. And the other fun thing about that, there is no standardized formula for how these are run. Even the different credit bureaus use different formulas. Informed consent is usually missing or is misunderstood. Statements in a privacy policy such as "we may share your information for marketing purpose with third parties" is not clearly informed consent to freely allow the use of personal data. Often users are not even asked for permission to gather their information. Data is being used for increasingly important decisions. Private data is being used on an ever-increasing basis to determine eligibility in significant life opportunities like jobs, consumer credit, insurance, and identity verification. Okay. Data breach consequences. The consequences to an organization that has suffered a data breach include reputation damage, IP theft, by that they're talking about intellectual property, and fines. There's a data types table: data type, description, and recommended handling. Confidential, highest level of data sensitivity, should only be made available to users with the highest level of pre-approved authentication. Private, restricted data with a medium level of confidentiality for users who have a need-to-know basis of the contents. Sensitive, data that could cause catastrophic harm to the company if disclosed, such as technical specifications for a new product. Restricted to employees who have a business need to access the data and have been approved. Critical, data classified according to the availability needs. If critical data not available to function and mission would be severely impacted. Critical data must be rigorously protected. Proprietary, this is data that belongs to the enterprise, can be available to any current employee or contractor. Public, no risk of release. For all public consumption, data is assumed to be public if no other data label is attached. PII, or personally identifiable information, data that could be potentially potentially identify a specific individual, should be kept a secret so that the individual cannot be singled out for identification. Protected health information, or PHI, data about a person's health status, provision of health care, or payment for health care, must be kept secure as mandated by HIPAA. Protecting data. Different technologies can be used to enhance the protection of privacy data, including the following. Data minimization is limiting the collection of personal information to that which is directly relevant and necessary to accomplish a specific task. Data masking involves creating a copy of the original data, but obfuscating, making unintelligible any sensitive elements such as a user's name or social security number. Also called data anonymization. Data masking is one way to perform data sanitization, which is the process of cleaning data to provide privacy protection. So old school is those old school memos you see with the black marks through them. Tokenization obfuscates sensitive data elements into a random string of character, or a token. Data sovereignty is the country-specific requirements that apply to data. Data destruction. This is actually very, very important. The information lifecycle is the flow of an information system's data from data creation to the time it becomes obsolete. Once the data is no longer useful, it should be destroyed. Paper media can be destroyed by burning, shredding, pulping, or pulverizing. In electronic media, data should never be erased using the OS delete command. Data could still be retrieved using third-party tools, and not, if it's just using the regular OS delete command, the tools you can use are very easy to find. Data sanitization tools can be employed to securely remove data. Wiping can be described as overwriting the disk space with zeros or random data. Degaussing permanently destroys the entire magnetic base drive, but that doesn't really work on SSDs, by reducing or eliminating the magnetic field. Another thing that they do, and we had one of these, it was actually kind of cool. When it comes to SSDs, it was actually found that they made this thing that looks like kind of like a giant hole punch, and it had these little tines that were designed to poke through specific parts of the SSD to destroy where those save points or critical points in the drive were. You load them in, and then you just pull this big thing and it could crunch and just right through the top of it and would physically destroy the hard drive. So it was toast. Knowledge check. Which technology for protecting data privacy involves obfuscation of personally identifiable information? Data masking, data sovereignty, data minimization, data exposing. Yep, good job. Okay, so that is it for that one. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.